I'm speaking with Emmy-winning composer Geoff Zanelli, who is continuing his collaboration with its director David Koepp with the upcoming caper comedy Mordecai. Geoff co-composed with British rocker Mark Ronson. Geoff also scored the fourth entry in Universal's successful Scorpion King series, The Scorpion King 4, Quest for Power. And, Geoff has demonstrated his amazing versatility on scores like Disturbia, Into the West, The Odd Life of Timothy Green, Killing Kennedy, Outlander, Hitman, and not to mention all his additional music on some of Hans Zimmer's biggest scores, such as Pirates of the Caribbean franchise, and fairly recently The Lone Ranger. Geoff, thanks again for chatting. Great to speak again.
Yes, of course. Thanks for calling. Appreciate it.
So, we've done quite a few interviews together. In fact, you were my very first interview on Film.Music.Media
right.
back in 2010. So that was almost 5 years ago. So thanks.
Right. Oh my gosh. Right.
So thanks again.
I think this is our third or fourth.
Yeah. So thanks again for always continuing to let me pick your brain over the years.
Of course.
So let's jump right into Mordecai, which is a movie that I really, really liked. It was funny because I bumped into you in the focus group screening last year, so I guess I've seen the finished product yet. So what's the process like for I guess just looking at the focus group, because I'm kind of interested in that. What's
Sure.
the process like for a composer going through a focus group? Was any feedback gathered that helped you in your process, or does, focus groups, do they usually get in the way? I've heard things like us, they're kind of getting in the way in the creative process. How does that kind of work?
Well, I think as long as everybody's using the focus group with the right, the right frame of mind, I think they're okay and they can be helpful. It's, sometimes a little too much emphasis could be placed on what one person in that room thinks,
mm-hmm.
and what you're actually trying to do is create an audience for your movie while staying, keeping the movie true to itself. So that's one of the tricky things, because sometimes you get into a focus group situation and there are people in the room that wouldn't have ever wanted to go and see this particular movie. So,
right.
You know what I mean? So what they have to say about it might not always be so helpful, because the movie just isn't for them, and that's the truth about any movie. There's someone that's never somebody out there doesn't like the Beatles. You know what I mean?
Right.
So no matter what you do. And so, but in the case of Mordecai, I think we did 3 of them, and they were used to be very, effective and helpful with the filmmaking process. So, for instance, musically, or I guess specific to the music, we got a lot of validation in some of the focus groups where somebody said, I knew from the opening notes that I was watching a higher class of movie. And I thought, well, that's actually pretty great. And this is, obviously the score's not finished when you go to these focus groups. It hasn't been recorded with the orchestra. And,
right.
Depending on how deep we are into the process, I think when you saw it, we were probably only about a third the way there with our demos. And so there's some temp score in there, and, it's probably hard to make much sense out of the music in those situations.
Right.
But the cues that we're in, people responded really well to them. The opening, and a lot of people were loving the, we coined a term for it, harpsichord aristofunk, which is the description that Mark and I came up with actually Mark came up with it, but it's as good a description as any for the score. And people were excited about the grooviness of it, and it was unique, and the instrumentation is a little quirky, and it's got that sort of old soul, new vibe feeling that you might expect or hope to hear with what Mark does in his whole career.
Right. And, you've worked with David Koepp on many films now. So
yeah.
do you find that working with the director multiple times gives you more creative freedom than maybe working with someone for the first time? Or is there the fact that there's more trust and maybe that there's more pressure because he knows you better than anybody else, so you can't really, I guess, get away with much? Like, kind of what's the process there?
Okay. I'm not ever trying to get away with anything. I know what you mean, though. David's, it's a great relationship. That's the thing. David gave me one of my very first breaks as a solo credit, which was the movie Secret Window.
Right.
But it was actually a co-score. Philip Glass and I came in, to work on that same score, and it was a big leap of faith on his part to say, let me get Geoff in on this thing. And so obviously I'm indebted to him for so much of that, so much of what's happened since. But we do, over the years we've developed a shorthand, which I think is, it's essential in that in this movie he was in New York, I was in Los Angeles. Mark was in Los Angeles sometimes, but sometimes in London, and So we were having to work remotely in a way that you don't always have. Most of the time, you have a lot of face-to-face meetings. But, because David and I have a trust and a history now, it's it's more workable, I think. So this was I would say, a pretty unique experience. There was a lot of experimentation, and I think it would have been really hard to do if David and I had only just met.
Right.
Because,
yeah.
Because he knows he can say anything to me, and I know that I can play anything to him as rough as it is. I can play him things that I know aren't right and say, I know this isn't right, but let's talk about it anyway.
Right.
That's a freedom you don't really get with a lot of directors. Something I probably wouldn't do with someone I was just meeting.
And just looking at the film overall, I found it to be, I loved it so much because, the trailer kind of makes it look more ridiculous than it is, but it's such a very, it reminded me of Pink Panther in spirit, kind of that old kind of slapstick comedy. The comedy timing of the actors are great. But musically, what was the goal here? Did you treat this as a comedy? Did you treat it as more of a caper? What did the film really need musically?
Right. Well, and actually that was the trickiest question to answer because, ultimately it is a comedy and it's got some elements of it are slapsticky, but, it's a comedy action movie, but there's still some stakes, and so you got to be serious sometimes. But the characters are so ridiculous and overblown at times that you if you play overly serious music, it starts to almost feel more like a parody than like a film. It's a really bizarre thing because I think when you talk to film composers who do a lot of comedies, they're always saying never make the music comedic, and that's sort of like the old standby rule. But it turns out, if you make it like totally deadpan, it starts to feel, like some of my favorite movies are Airplane or Harold and Kumar or something,
right.
But that's not what we're doing. What we're actually doing is we're doing a spy caper, which really has one foot in the 60s and one foot in 2015. So there's all of this sort of stylistic, material, I guess, that we can draw from and build a score from, and it's so colorful that it allows you to go and be like ultra colorful with the instrumentation and the notes and everything. So the goal was to try to find this balance where we're not, we're not disservicing the film by being too comedic or by being too serious. And it really was a matter of, going one way and then nudging it back and then nudging it back again. There's a lot of that throughout the whole process. And by the way, that's not just, the studio or David or someone calling me and saying, nudge it back. It's, we watch these focus group screenings in a room for the same reason. And I'm sitting there going, okay, this feels too far one way or the other. And we've got to tailor it and we've got to, make these tiny incremental improvements throughout the whole score until we run out of time. So like, I'm not one of those guys that like, finishes writing the last note 2 weeks before the orchestra's done, and then I just go to sleep for 2 weeks. If I did that, I'd go back through it. So, because I'm passionate about this stuff. I don't go to sleep, and I think, well, I guess every composer is, but we just kept trying to push it forward and see how far we could take it with things. So.
And just, you talk about sitting in the room and watching it with the audience. I think as, looking at the short films I've ever made or something like that, you see it differently, I think, when you're in a room full of people. Is that true that you kind of start imagining how they're interpreting it instead of just your interpretation for it? And it only happens when they're there,
Yes, it's true. It's funny because it happens in stages too. Because say I'm in a room, I'm writing music by myself, or in this case, in a room with Mark, and it's the two of us. And we're getting really excited about a piece of music, and we get it all cooking, and we say, okay, now let's send it to David, right? And then we'll be on the phone with him or something, and we're listening to it and watching it down sort of together, and all of a sudden it sounds different, just because David's watching it. And you go, oh, okay, hang on. These are the elements that are really working, and there's stuff we can work on and sort of tailor. And then you do it again in a room with 500 strangers, and it happens again, so there's all you're really doing every time someone comes in the room to listen to your music is exposing how fragile you really are as a composer or something. And you have to embrace it, you have to be able to go, all right, this is actually terrifying to do this, but the good news is it can only make the score better, which can only make the film better.
Right.
You know, but those are naked moments. They're you know, I don't know a composer who doesn't find that stuff nerve-wracking.
Oh yeah, I can't.
But we got to do it.
Right. And so you did co-score, you mentioned, with Mark Ronson. So how did that collaboration come to be? I'm assuming, I guess David introduced you guys because you never worked before.
He did, yeah. Right. Well, because here's the thing. So as soon as the movie got greenlit, I called David, and before I could even say, I hope we get to do this, he says, I hope we get to do this movie together. I hope you want to go. Actually, what he said to me was, I just got off the phone with Lionsgate. I hope you want to score this movie. And I said, well, guess why I called, right? And he says, but listen, when I was writing the script, he always listens to music when he writes. Mm-hmm. And then, which is actually a great thing to go in and get his playlist and say, what were you listening to? And one of the things that really stuck out for him was Mark's album, which is called Version. And it has these three interstitial pieces. I think they're called inversion, outversion, and diversion, I think. I might be getting that wrong. But anyway, he was really enamored with the sound of those, and he thought, it reminded him so much of movies of the 60s when he was growing up, but yet it still had a modern sound. And he said, look, can I put you guys in a room, and then you tell me, and he'll tell me, if you guys think you can work together. And it was like, I think only a week later he came over, Mark did, and it was instant. It was like, wait a sec, we might as well have been in a band together in high school. It felt like it was really instant click, and we went, let's just call David right now. You know what I mean? Let's do this. So it was exciting. And it was, obviously Mark is a producer, and his entire, way of making music is collaborative.
Right.
And you can say the same about me because you see all the guys that I collaborate with. And even in my solo credits, I'm collaborating with musicians. And, so I don't know if that makes us unique, but it certainly made us compatible. Mm-hmm. And then we visited the set, and we were talking mostly just ideas and conversations about the music. And Mark and I said, okay, let's do this. Let's go back to our caves, because we all have ideas, and let's just work for a week or 2 weeks and come back together and see what we've got, right? And so once that happened, he played me a piece that was like so similarly built in terms of the music and the harmonies, but stylistically something that is, unique to Mark. But what I mean is the music still had these elements in it that overlapped with the music that I was writing, and we went, hey, this is really going to work. So I'll take this melody that I wrote, which became one of the themes we used for Mordecai, and kind of built it into the sonic world that he had started with, and all of a sudden we've got a Mordecai theme that feels, equal parts both of us. Send it off to David, and he's like, that's going in the movie now. So, and that was like the opening of the movie. It's still in there now, but they had done some, after that, they shot a new opening and everything. So the opening's slightly different, but we still retain that piece. And it was, it was our first hit, and it was right out of the gate. And then it became like, well, we don't need to work in isolation. Let's hunch over a keyboard, or let's go into a studio, and we rented in a bunch of instruments. There wasn't anywhere to stand in my studio because we had a Farfisas in there. This is an old organ, and some of Mark's refurbished 60s guitar amps, and we had a drum kit in there, and we were just playing music, and it became like the performance became part of the writing. And by the way, this is knowing full well that we're going to also get professionals to come in and replay this stuff. But it wasn't like, it's really hard to mock up, you don't want to listen to a fake guitar or something. Right. So we went and played it, and we built it, and, we did a pretty elaborate demos, and it just, it clicked. I feel like at least maybe 2/3 or 3/4 of the score was Mark and I in a room together. And then, obviously you tailor things after that. And if there's a big orchestral chart to write, then I go and do that and add it to the piece or something. But we found, I think we just found it was a great way to collaborate.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear that. He comes from the rock. He comes from the kind of a rock music scene, and to see you guys complement each other, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I think it really worked. And actually, one of the things people sort of forget is I actually did come up, not professionally, but I was always a rock guitarist, and I grew up in Orange County, which means I had a ska band, and we were no good. But but I certainly come up with that, and I have I guess some amount of a pop or a rock sensibility that still gets into the music. I mean, you can even look at Pirates and hear it in there. You know what I mean? Like that's probably why I was well suited to those scores as well, in a funny way, because we're doing rock music on an orchestra, right?
Right.
So it's I guess it made it feel like a good and easy fit, and in some funny way, if Mark had made a slightly different decision at some point in his career, he might well have ended up doing what I did, and I think you could say the same for me. It just feels like, we're musical collaborators first, and then I'm a film composer second. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, we're coming from the same place. We want to be making music, and we, we're the same age practically, so we have the same references, and we're forever going, Stevie Wonder, Quincy Jones, Mancini, the things that maybe they weren't current when we were teenagers, but we were listening to them.
Right. Yeah.
So because we were explorers, so it was great.
No, and you can definitely tell, just from your background and everyone that I know that you work with, and people that I usually kind of gravitate towards, they come from that kind of rock background, and you can hear it in your melodies and the way you write and the way your scores hook people, and that's why I think connect with your music a lot. Too.
Oh, good. Well, I'm happy to hear that. I really am, and and then I did go off and get myself educated, so I can at least
talk to human beings.
You know what I mean? Like, I can hold on to some of the sophistication that I would have if I wasn't if those weren't my roots. But yes, it's true. You can never sort of let go of what you came up through, and the music you listened to on the way up. So.
But before you even met Mark, was there ever a point? I mean, have you encountered this, maybe not just on this project, but other projects where, this is not just like you, Hans, and Blake doing the Pacific, that you're meeting someone for the first time and you don't know if it's going to work. Luckily it did, but it's almost, I guess, I would think of it as like being back in school and your teacher forces you to do a group project, Like, is there ever that, it's like, oh man, I want to work with my friends, but it's like, luckily.
Well, no, in this case, not at all, because as soon as David said, what do you think of Mark Ronson? And I went, man, okay, I knew him obviously from the Amy Winehouse records, and I know the Bruno Mars records, and I'm unashamed to say that I love pop music, and he's a big part of the reason why.
Cool.
So it's sort of like, oh, you're gonna yes, that sounds great. And I've had other collaborations too. I guess I don't know that I've ever felt like I didn't want to go and collaborate, with someone. I've always thought, well, this is an opportunity, especially something like with Mark, because, there's so much that I have to learn from him. Do you know what I mean? So this is great, and I feel like he would say vice versa. And so it wasn't like, it's just, I guess it's a different type of collaboration than the Pacific, where obviously everybody can learn something from everybody, but Hans, Blake, and I are all film composers working in a similar medium, and, in other words, we had a lot of, I guess, overlap in a way in our styles, and Mark and I had just enough. And what was really interesting was the stuff that he could do that I couldn't, and the stuff that I could do that he couldn't, because, then we have this little bridge in between those things that makes it all work together. But this score is what it is because we each showed up. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, right. No, that makes total sense. Yeah. So now, kind of moving off of the comedy caper, going into the more action-oriented thing, you also scored the Scorpion King 4, The Quest for Peace, which is, they're both available. The scores are out, and La La Land is doing Mordecai, I think, on next Tuesday, so the physical release, so that's going to be awesome.
So they're actually also doing a Scorpion King. I believe the physical's the week after that.
Right. I gotta get my signed copy, yes.
Oh, of course. Of course, I'll get you one. No problem.
No, but for Scorpion King, it's kind of funny because you're kind of following the footsteps of colleagues, that you've worked with before, like Klaus Badell and Trevor Morris, and I think we're all under one roof at one time or another. But
that's true. Yeah.
So did you ever look at their stuff before you entered the Fourth Realm and go, okay, this is what they did, this is what's been done, or do you kind of keep your palate clean?
I kept it clean, but for a reason though, and because when I met with Mike Elliott, he's the director, he said, "Look, it's kind of a new direction for the series. You know, it's lighter, it's sort of tongue in cheek, and it sort of, I don't know how to say it. It's sort of when he makes it more like, it's more comedic than I think you'd expect, and because of it, it doesn't really fall into the sort of dangerous cliches of, I mean, you know, of fantasy movies, right. You know, because they're really dangerous. You know, there's so many things, and it's not to say that, you know, there is still a dragon, there's still, you know what I mean, there's all this stuff, but he tried to do it in a way that was unique, and so it wasn't about carrying on a line or a through line from all four movies, right. But instead it was, this is a new direction, and let's get your take on it, and you know, and certainly a lot of new characters showed up, and so, you know, I just approached it as its own thing.
So was it a very kind of action melodic kind of thing? I mean, was it just kind of old school? Yeah. Did you try to do ethnic instrumentation, or did you just keep it modern? I mean, what was the approach for it?
I did. Okay, right. I see what you mean. So it was, well, it's definitely a big action adventure.
Right.
And I had an orchestra, and, you know, a full orchestra out in Bratislava that I recorded the score with, but I also did augment it with ethnic instruments that were just... Look, I wasn't trying to, like, handcuff myself to some type of ethnic authenticity, because it's a movie about mechanical dragons and belching pygmies and
stuff. It's
not
a documentary, you know. It's not
right, exactly. So the ethnic instrumentation is really there as a color, or, you know, there's a lot of mysterious things and sort of ancient magic, I guess, which means, you know, you would actually be, if you were trying to be realistic, you'd be drawing on music that nobody knows what it sounded like anyways, because it was before we wrote it down, you know. So I wasn't thinking of it as something where I had to go and be authentic. I was going, you know, I need an orchestra, I need some instrumentation that's outside the orchestra. I think there's some duduk and other woodwinds like that, and I also sort of tortured a dulcimer to make it not sound like a dulcimer anymore that I went and recorded. And then on top of that, it does have a modern edge too. There's basically in the middle of it. This is what I loved about my director. Whenever I started to get like really serious and talk about adventure and honor and all the important themes that I was seeing in the movie, he goes, "Yeah, but Geoff, don't forget that in the middle of this movie, there's a cage fight between two women in tattered clothes." Right. Okay. So stop being pretentious, and, you know, it's okay to have the electric guitars, and it's okay, you know, to like go and just have a little bit of fun with it, because it is irreverent, and it's, you know, it's got a, I guess I want to say a lightheartedness about it that you wouldn't necessarily expect with all these sort of muscle-bound dudes trying to kill each other all the time.
It's amazing that series has survived the way it has. You know?
Sure.
And it's you know, I tell people, I'm like, Scorpion 4, it's like, there's four of them? You know?
I know, but apparently they're all a little bit different, too, because this one, it's a new direction, and I think they've gradually found that the lighter tone is more appropriate for what it actually is, because you're supposed to just be having fun.
Right.
You know?
I mean, those are the types of movies, you know, like Sharknado, stuff like that, where it's people go.
So,
it's just a ridiculous good time. So.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Right. One hopes.
So kind of looking kind of overall, you've been composing for quite a while now. You've worked on so many different projects. So I'm kind of wondering, I feel like, you know, a composer has to really encompass everything of the finished film into their approach. So if you look at any other job on a film set or in a film production, what would you pick? Well, if you had to pick another job on a movie to do besides composer, what would you choose?
Wow, that's actually really interesting, because what I really like about writing music and movies and stuff is movies that take place slightly outside of reality. So that's why I like these fantasy movies. So, you know, I met a guy during Outlander who was a creature designer, and I thought, man, that's just cool. All right, like I thought I had the cool job, and you know what I mean. So that's something I think would be really interesting, or you know, creating worlds, right? And I guess that's what I sort of gravitate towards, is when people are getting to make, you know, something out of nothing. I mean, if you look at, I'm thinking of Rango even, where it's like there's a very particular look to this movie, you know, that exists because how they created the characters and all that. So I can't help but think that would be totally interesting to me. I would never want to be a director because it just seems like, oh my gosh. Like, anyway, I know how hard they work and I know what they go through, and so I don't know. I suppose something like that, and there's a little part of me that thinks I would also have made a pretty good writer if I had ever gotten around to, figuring out how to use words instead of music. But the reason I think that is whenever I work with writer-directors, it meshes really well. So like David Koepp, for instance, or David Duchovny, who wrote the first movie I scored, House of D.
Right, yeah.
Or Peter Hedges for With Odd Life. They're all writers, and there's a mentality there that really meshes, I think, with a composer, because I think it's very similar. So, if I just don't know as many words as they do, so I couldn't be a writer.
No, I think
even their emails feel like poetry to me.
Because one of the few examples that I think is amazing is Nick Cave, who composes films and writes screenplays. And the proposition is, I think, I forget if he wrote Lawless, but because I think you're writing a narrative through music, and I think it's very similar writing narrative, with language. So I think it definitely crosses over very, very easily. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it does. But like I said, it is about. Becoming a writer is a lifelong endeavor as well. And I think there are probably very few people who could do that and be a great composer. But it doesn't mean there are none. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because it certainly is a similar mindset. It's just that, you hear how I'm talking. I struggle to find words all the time, but I can play you a tune pretty easily. So you know what I mean? Like I guess it's just a different language, and I gravitated towards music probably because of that.
Well, yeah. Well, I think you found definitely where you're supposed to be, because
it's going all right.
Loving everything you do. So
right. Well, it's just because we were talking about it. It was an interesting segue into what I was thinking about with Mordecai, which is because Mark is a record producer, he was able to bring in some artists who wrote lyrics and turned two of our themes into songs. And I thought, first off, I thought these are really good melodies, and maybe there's a way to turn them into songs, but I don't know how, because I don't know how to write a lyric. Mm-hmm. And actually, the first one happened really organically. There's a love theme in the movie, which is very very I want to say like soft focus, like Vaseline on the camera lens. Mm-hmm. Like it sounds like that looks, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a flugelhorn. I finally got to have a flugelhorn in my movie. And anyway, we sent that piece of music to a woman named Rose Eleanor Dougal, who's a singer that Mark has worked with before. And she was actually just singing the vocals on the cue, which was an instrumental piece of music, but it had some sort of oohs and ahs, like that initially it was going to be that very 60s kind of Esquivel pop, small group of vocals sound. But instead, Mark thought, well, let's send it to my friend Rose, and because she has a more modern sound, she's more kind of a modern indie sound, very dreamy and gorgeous. And she sent the cue back and went, wow, okay, this is amazing, and it transcends what I thought it would be. But then, a few days later, she said, I'm experimenting with making this into a song. What do you think? And she sends that over, and it's got lyrics, and it's got a whole new, expansion of the melody and everything. And all of a sudden, all she had to work with was my little demo, so she's just chopping it around. And then we went, hang on, we can really turn this into a really interesting and cool song. So we did. Ended up, they use it in the movie too, but I just thought it was an interesting thing, because now you go, okay, I wrote this piece of music, but I couldn't write lyrics, and Mark probably can, but he didn't. He sent it to her, mm-hmm. And then he said, why don't we also take our two main Mordecai themes, we'd co-written both of them, and we kind of built a song form out of it, and he sent that out to a guy named Miles Kane, who came back with the lyrics and a performance, and it's exciting to see these things turn into songs, because it's not what you set out to do. But when you get it in the hands of someone who really knows how to write a lyric and construct a song, it becomes really amazing. So, if you've heard the album, that one's called Joanna, and the love theme one is called Heart's a Liar. And anyway, it was just sort of like, oh wow, I sort of accidentally wrote a song, but it does take me back to my roots, and it's certainly well within Mark's comfort zone to put something like that together. So, that's just, I guess, another one of the great fruits of the collaboration.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was one other question that I was going to ask that I think I actually glazed over, was that, you scored Johnny Depp, I think, I don't know how many times now, but is
8 now, yeah.
8 is scoring the same actor in many different performances, is that comparable to maybe working like with the same director? Like, do you kind of start to get a feel for their, I guess, techniques or styles, and do you can you I know what Johnny's doing here, this is what I did last time, I know how to work with this. Like, do you kind of look at it that way? Like, I mean...
No, not quite, but only because I think, Johnny is such a high caliber actor that it's, his mannerisms are constructed for the character, and they're not necessarily his mannerisms. They're the ones that he builds when he makes Jack Sparrow, who is very different from Mordecai, despite that it's the same actor, and certainly different from him in Secret Window, So I can only say that it's similar when it's the same character, and that would be in the case of the Pirates movies, where he's sticking to a character that he built. Even as he expands on it, it's still it's at its core, it's still Jack Sparrow.
Right. Yeah.
So so that rhythm certainly informs the music. Mordecai's a very different character, though. You know what I mean? Like, he's so entitled and aristocratic, and he just loves himself. And well, I guess Jack Sparrow does too, but it's not it's not a rehashed performance. In other words, it's a new construction, and so I think it inspires something new in the score.
Well, that's I know I was just thinking about that. It's super interesting. But Geoff, thanks for your time. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you, and it really is a great film, Mordecai. I mean, I loved it. I mean, I went with I think my friend and my girlfriend. We all loved it. We thought it was just a great film. So I can't wait to see the finished product.
Oh, I'm happy to hear. Yeah, I'd love to hear what you think of it, and now you'll get to hear the whole score.
Can't wait. Yeah.
And I really do think it came together. I got to say, it's a red letter day, and we got to record with the Dap Kings and the Roots with our horn section, or part of some of those guys, and then I had an orchestra and everything over in Abbey Road. So we had we got everything we wanted. It was great. It was perfect.
Congrats. It was awesome.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Raging again, and I'm dressed in trouble.